What I want to do today is actually take a break from project management for a minute, and let's talk about tennis. Now, this picture was obviously taken a while ago, before the current lockdown. But I want to take you back much further than that. I want to take you back to the early 1990s. Nirvana and grunge were all the rage, and Andre Agassi was my favorite player. So picture me on the court as a young man playing this old dude. My opponent serves, I hit a good return, the ball comes back to me in the middle of the court, I take a few steps forward and I attack the ball. It's my point and I'm feeling great. Yet I would go on to lose the match. Early in my career, this was the story of way too many of my matches. And I had a hard time understanding why. I was clearly had the better strokes. I was faster, more aggressive, yet I would lose the match. I would watch professional players on TV, see how they play, what strategies they use, what patterns they play, and try to emulate that on the court, but really to no effect. Now, I knew my opponents tended to be more conservative and slower on the court, and my thinking was I would win by overpowering them, because that's what I would see on TV. Now, over the years, I've mellowed out quite a bit. My game is mellowed out quite a bit. In fact, now I am the old dude playing the younger guys. So what I didn't realize, though, that all of this is actually backed by research. Simon Ramo wrote this book in 1973. In this, he details a study that he conducted on looking at how professional tennis players play their matches and compare that to amateur tennis players, how they play and win their matches. So professional players, they win their matches by scoring more points, which seems very obvious. But what it really means is they are so equally matched to their opponent and are playing at such a high consistent level that the way that they win their matches is by hitting winners and scoring, actively going out and scoring points. And usually the player that hits the most winners wins the match. His biggest finding, though, was that it's quite a different story for amateurs. For amateur players, or ordinary players as he calls them, 80% of the points are lost and not won. What that means is one of the players will just make a mistake, hit the ball long, hit it in the net, or leave an easy point for the others to finish. So in fact, the best strategy for amateur players to win a match is focused on not losing the match by making fewer mistakes. So in addition to that, if professionals or amateurs want to improve their game, it's also quite different. So professionals, if they want to improve their game, they focus on their attack and their strengths, even further sharpening their attack, further strengthening some of the weapons they have. And that's what I was trying to do as a young man, trying to focus on my winning shots. Where I could have seen a much bigger payoff, though, is if I had focused on consistency or addressing some of my weaknesses in my game, or just in general making fewer unforced errors. I would have seen a much bigger payoff in that. So that's actually quite interesting to me, because it really means that while professional amateurs, they're playing the same game by the same set of rules, the strategy that they use to win their matches is completely and totally different. To put that sort of in a business language, applying the industry best practices of professional tennis players did not give me the outcomes that I was looking for. And therefore, I would say, great for professional tennis, great for inspiration, not as much for aspiration. So you may be thinking, well, okay, this is great, Steven, but I'm glad you were able to work out your game and improve your game. But what does any of this have to do with project management or Agile or Spotify for that matter? So good question. Let's shift gears to the Spotify model. So this picture is a very famous picture that comes out of a case study that was written in 2012 that describes how the company Spotify was growing and scaling agility in their organization at that point in time. So here, I want to take a minute and hear from the audience. And if you can open up the chat feature and just enter there, information. Have you heard about this? Is this completely new to you? Is this something you've kind of heard about? You may have seen this picture, or is it something? Yep, I know all the ins and outs. Just please type it into the chat and let me know. Okay, see a lot of new to me, new. All right.
All I've seen is new so far.
All right, excellent. Okay, not new. Hey, there's one.
There you go.
All right. Excellent. New. All right, good. So it seems like it's new to most people. Well, I'm actually not really going to go into the details of this model at this point. What I will just suffice to say that when I first read this case study, I found it very interesting. It talks about how Spotify is organized in tribes and squads and chapters and guilds, and it also has some real world information on how they make certain trade-offs and what are some of the things that they were struggling with and how they solved it for that situation. By the way, if you download my slides, on the last slide, there's a link to the actual case study itself. If you're interested in ever reading it, I highly recommend it. It's a good read. Now, I said I really like this case study, and in fact, I'm not alone in this. This is still something that's widely used by Agile coaches and other management gurus to sort of present it as the gold standard of how you can scale agility within your company. What I want to do, though, is in this presentation is place it in the right context. So Spotify is first and foremost, of course, a technology company. Secondly, they're digitally native, meaning they were founded in 2006 and launched their product that we all know and love in 2008. And thirdly, they were very much an emerging culture at the time that this case study was written. They were growing from about 300 employees in 2011 to about 1,000 employees in 2013. So it means that at the time of that this case study was written, they were no longer a pure startup anymore, but they were also absolutely not a fully fledged, mature company. And they were just growing very rapidly at that point in time. So I want to contrast that to more the reality of some of the organizations that I personally worked in, and hopefully is also a little bit closer to some of the companies that you have experiences with. So my case is I've pretty much my whole career worked for traditional enterprises, which are very decidedly not technology companies. They tend to be large enterprises with multiple lines of business, multiple sets of customers, different business models, and so on. In my case, it tends to be very large companies with 100,000 employees or more, and also companies that have been around for at least 50 years or more. Which then in turn means that because they've been around for a while, they will have a mix of older technology and newer technology. And especially that older technology or legacy technology will really limit how fast you can change your processes, your ways of working compared to some of your digitally native counterparts. And of course, because they're both large, as well as that they've been around for a while, these companies very much have a very established culture. First and foremost, they tend to be not, in my experience, not to be very tech savvy or IT minded in the first place. They may be fairly hierarchical in nature or have a bit of bureaucracy in there and so on. And what I usually say to describe these are oil tankers, not speedboats. They just cannot move or change as quickly. So I think you can see this is very different from Spotify. So the key point here is that the Spotify model that I showed, it works for them in their situation at that point in time. But that does not mean it necessarily fits to your current situation. So again, here I would say great for inspiration, not as much for aspiration. So you may be thinking, well, okay, I kind of get what you're saying, Stephen, but why does it matter? Why are you making such a big deal about this? What's the impact? What does it mean to me? Well, I really don't have anything against the Spotify model. Like I said, I like the model. I like the company Spotify, and I enjoy their product pretty much every single day. I'm just using it as an example of holding yourself to an unattainable standard. You may have all the best intentions to improve your ways of working, but applying somebody else's model or theory that does not fit your context will not get you where you want to go. And that's the curse of the Spotify model. I also could have called this the curse of the Harvard Business Review or the curse of whatever the current popular management book is at the moment. So let's shift gears a little bit and go a little bit deeper and also make this a little bit more practical. And let's talk about self-managing teams. So when we're looking at self-managing teams, again, I'll ask here for you to go to the chat and just let me know what are some of the first things that come to mind. When you see those words self-managing team, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Chaos. I like that.
The Q&A, you have minimal oversight.
All right, minimal oversight. Autonomy. Well-structured and defined work.
Hippies.
All right, excellent, very good. So a typical definition that you would see is probably something along these lines. Self-managing teams are self-selecting, self-organizing, and stable. What it means, self-selecting means they select their own team members. Self-organizing means they organize their own work, and stable just means they stay together for a long period of time. Now, what is often not said or sort of glossed over is that there's actually a number of other things that need to be in place as well, or assumptions that go into this that need to be in place in order for this to be successful. So these teams need to understand the context they're operating in. They need to understand the context of the business, the strategy of the business, the goals of the project, what direction the company wants to go on. And of course, they need to understand the business process, not just what is the general trend within the industry, no, what is your specific business process, what are some of the pain points today, where are some of the strengths today, and again, what's the goals, what are you trying to achieve? And in addition to that, since we're talking about more technology-driven work, also they need to understand the technology landscape. What is your current architecture with, again, some strengths and weaknesses? What's your future vision? Which direction are you going to go with your technology? And why do they need this? They really need this so they can ask the right questions. The team needs to have the right context so they can have an effective discussion and effectively collaborate to come up with the best possible solution for whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, or whatever the product is you're trying to build. So this, I would say, is the ideal state. If you have all of this in place, that's great. But again, this may not really line up to the reality you have in your organization. Your organization may look more something like this. You may have your teams may have a mix of internal employees with contractors, with vendors and other third parties doing pieces of the work. You may have subcontracted pieces of the work to external parties. So if we look at the items on the right hand of the slide, does that mean that this team is self-selecting? No, absolutely not. Does it mean they're self-organizing? Maybe. Depends a little bit on how you define it. Are they stable for the long run? No, most likely not. And business context and process and technology landscape, yeah, that's sort of a mixed bag at best. So in addition to this, your teams may be operating in more of a command and control type of culture, more that hierarchical culture within established organizations. So while you may have a self-managing team, that team may not actually believe they're truly allowed to self-manage because they've probably been burned in the past. And to be very fair to managers, it's very easy to transition to self-managing teams when things are going great. But as soon as things are starting to deteriorate or not go as well as we would like, it's also very easy for managers to sort of slip back into old behaviors and old patterns. That's just human nature, to be quite honest. Now, how would you recognize if some of this is going on your teams? So here are some of the things you can look for. First and foremost, no clarity on goals. If you connect with your team, you talk to each individual on your team and just ask them, hey, what's the goal of the project? What are we trying to do? What's the goal of what's the next milestone we're working through, or the next release or iteration or sprint or program increment or whatever name you give to it. And if you start getting a lot of different answers from your team members, that's definitely a red flag. Secondly, poor communication. So this you can observe by just sitting in on a few meetings that the team is having. Just sort of be that fly on the wall. Here you may see if the team is not making an effort to make sure that every single person is heard and that everybody's voice and everybody's opinion is heard, that's an issue. Especially in today's situation where we sort of unexpectedly all had to transition to this remote way of working. I'm sure you've all been on either video calls or phone conferences where you have multiple people speak at the same time. And what you may have also realized is that if that happens, it's actually always the same people that end up speaking and the same people that end up not speaking. And if the team is either consciously or unconsciously not making the effort to make sure that people that are not speaking, that their voice is heard as well, that means you have a communication challenge in your project. Second point I would want to make on poor communication is if people are really speaking from a desire to sort of convince and prove their point and win the argument, and rather than from a perspective of trying to find the best solution for whatever the problem is you're trying to solve, whether that solution comes from you or from somebody else. And I know this may be kind of ironic because I'm speaking to you in a way to try to convince you of my points and my points of view, but what we're having here right now is a presentation. It's not a collaboration, right? We'll have some more discussion in the Q&A, but right now we're not having a discussion. I'm trying to deliver a certain message here. And thirdly then, no commitment to the team. So this is a little harder to observe on the outset, but it typically comes down to things like, is nobody volunteering to pick up assignments? Is nobody actually taking responsibility for the thing that they're supposed to be responsible for? Or if a team member needs help, everybody sort of looks the other way and people are not really trying to help each other and go that extra mile. So if you observe some of these behaviors in your team, what is the suggestions of the theory around self-managing teams and how to address these? Well, self-managing teams, you would say things like you need to work on culture within your team. You need to create shared values within your team. You need to create an agile mindset or a growth mindset within your team. And that's absolutely right. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But there's a challenge with that. The challenge with that is actually that some of these things, they're kind of nebulous and a little hard to pin down. And a second challenge is that these things take a very long time to implement. And thirdly, if you're somewhere in the middle of implementing this and your team composition changes, it's like hitting a reset button and you have to restart a whole bunch of these activities. So what I'm going to suggest here today and what I'm going to leave you with is an alternative approach of how can you address some of the challenges of self-managing teams within the reality that you're living in within your teams. So I am a big fan of the old 80-20 rule or the Pareto principle. In this case, I'm looking to get 80% of the value or 20% of the effort. And I really like that for a number of reasons. Firstly, what I'm going to show you is fairly easy and fast to implement. There is a pretty much immediate feedback loop, so you get fast feedback whether it's working or not. Thirdly, because it's fairly low effort, it's also fairly easy to sort of rinse and repeat if your team composition changes. And lastly, and very importantly, I'm actually pretty lazy at heart, so 20% kind of the maximum that you can get from me. So what would I do here? I would focus on creating a set of productive team members. And when I say productive team members, I mean professionals and adults working together to create the outcome that we're looking for. And one of the fastest ways to do that is as a project manager or as a scrum master or whatever the name is that you want to give to it, act as a facilitator of the communication. If you help facilitate some of the communication within the team, it sort of acts as a shortcut to improve the communication pretty much immediately and also create some sort of semblance of psychological safety within the team, which then in turn will probably have some self-reinforcing effects and you start seeing more positive payoff out of that. Next, I would focus on making the implicit explicit. With that, I mean things like, this is how we do stuff around here. This is how we want to work together. So you can formalize this and just write it down together with the team as part of working agreements. And I think this is especially relevant if you have, you're working with multiple teams, cross-functional teams that generally do not work together because they're not used to collaborating. And then lastly, create situational awareness in your team. Now, that term requires a little bit more explanation. So, situational awareness is a term that originated in the Air Force. what it means is rather than just be singly focused on your mission or your goal, you also need to be aware of your surroundings at any given point in time. So if you imagine you're one of the pilots in one of the aircraft in the picture, I think you can imagine that you have to have a very close eye out for all the other airplanes that are around you, because they're very, very close. But in addition to that, you also need to be aware of where are you compared to the ground or compared to other obstacles like mountains. You need to monitor your fuel load, watch your airspeed, watch your engine temperature, and there's a whole host of other instruments in the aircraft that you'll have to monitor. And now imagine how that is amplified if you're in a combat situation where people are actively trying to shoot you from the sky. Now, I'm hoping that nobody in your project is trying to kill you, but I think it's still very important for you to create situational awareness in your project on things like what are the boundaries of your project? What are some of the guardrails or non-negotiables? So let's give some examples there. Is it more important to deliver a solution fast, or is it more important to deliver a comprehensive solution? There's no absolute right or wrong answer there, but it's important that you're clear on what's the most important in that particular situation in that particular point in time. Is your project looking to grow sales or create operational efficiencies? Ideally, you create both, but if there's a trade-off between these two, what's the most important? And then as an example of non-negotiables, I worked a lot in the healthcare space, so a clear non-negotiable there is you can never impact patient safety. Now, and that will be obvious to every single employee in your company, but if you have new employees coming in, or contractors or vendors, that may not be as obvious to them. So, to return back to the previous slide, there's one more point I want to make here. All of this is especially relevant in today's remote working environment. The COVID-19 situation has just unexpectedly thrown us in this situation where we unexpectedly lost the ability to work together face to face. But more importantly, you lost that ability to sort of pull somebody to the side and just ask them a quick question in the hallway. And therefore, all of these things, facilitating communication, making things explicit, creating situational awareness, are especially important in today's environment. So to close out this section, I'm sure you can probably guess the next slide. This is great for inspiration, but maybe self-managing teams as an aspiration may be too much. I also want to be very clear here. I'm by no means saying that self-managing teams are a bad idea or doomed for failure. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. What I am saying, though, is you need to be realistic of what's the composition of your team and how long are they going to stay together, and where can you best invest your time and energy to improve that team, to create that high-performing team that you're looking for. So, in closing, what I want to say is improving how you work is hard, no matter how you approach it. But modeling yourself to a gold standard is just making it harder than it needs to be. So when you're building a team or an organization, you should focus on your needs over Agile models and management theory. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and let's take some questions.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Waiting for questions to come in. How about, oh, those are all responses. So far, no questions. Any questions, anybody in the audience? Got 64 attendees. So far, no questions, Stephen.
All right. Well, come on. It wasn't that clear.
Oh, sorry. I've been rushing them. All right, hold on. Let me type. People are typing. Sorry. We're rushing people. Love the presentation. You're getting lots of compliments.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
There we go. How can you help team identify its unique needs?
How can you help a team identify its unique needs? I think you can interpret that question in multiple ways. So I think it probably, so I'm going to interpret it in what are their needs, how they want to collaborate and work together. So I think it comes down to just sitting down with the team, quite frankly, and sitting down with the individuals and just asking them to be very honest, to be very blunt. There's probably some tools and tricks and techniques that you can use for this. What I would say is it helps when people introduce themselves. They talk a little bit about their background, and not just in the normal sort of vanilla way, like, oh, I have 20 years of experience doing this, this, and this. What I found that's very helpful for me, also working with my team, is just describing how you can best work with me. Because everybody has their own little things, everybody has their pet peeves, and so do I. So as an example, I have a team of about 50 project managers. We're running about 100 projects at any given point in time, and it's just, I can't be everywhere, I can't be in all the ins and outs, which means I get a lot of email and a lot of meeting invites. So part of what I tell my team is, okay, to work with me, don't just assume that just because I got copied on an email that I actually know and I read it and I understood it. But if you need something from me, just let me know. And this is the best way, because this is my preferred way of communication. So in my case, send me an instant message or text me or call me. Different people have different preferences. So just having the team themselves talk about a little bit about their preferences. But then also in this situation, because we're working this sort of unexpected remote way, what are some of the boundaries or challenges they have? Because some of the teams may have small kids that they need to help them with schoolwork, or they're taking care of other loved ones, so they have other boundaries and needs and so on. So having that discussion with the team, I think people tend to be quite open with that. They may be a little bit quiet in the beginning, but you can get them to open up.
How often do you think that should you have these conversations? And do you do it as a group, or do you do it individually? How do you suggest approaching that?
Yeah, good question. I think both individually as well with groups. I can say again in my own example, I work remotely. And I've been working remotely for the last probably 10 plus years. So I've been doing it since before it was cool. And one of the things that I found most effective is just having lots of one-on-ones. Lots of one-on-one interactions to sort of replace that where normally I would just walk into somebody's office or cube and say, hey, how are things going? Because that communication you just sort of lose in the current situation.
So you have to make a point of doing it on your own.
Yes. Yep. And then I'd like to not have a very structured agenda. So it tends to not be, okay, I'm going to meet with this person, and now here are the things. Tell me about this project. I'd like to keep it a little open so they can bring the topics that they want to talk about. Which means with some people, we end up talking about how they're challenged with dealing with their kids, or how they're challenged with the current situation. Others, it's all business and not a lot of personal things. That you will get that from your different team members. But also as a team, you want to do a talk about it. So it depends a little bit on the team in terms of the frequency. I think you also want to make sure that you're not overdoing it per se. because I've seen some groups that now all of a sudden started having virtual coffees or virtual happy hours and so on. And if you were doing that before, that's great. But if you weren't doing that before, you might want to make sure you're also not overdoing it, right? Again, especially in the current situation, because your team may be more interested in, okay, rather than hang out with the team, just give me that half an hour or hour back in my day so I can spend it with my kid or my family or things along those lines, right? It really depends on sort of your mix of people. It's hard to sort of give a general guideline there.
You talked about structure and the communication and how you don't like to have too much structure when you're doing your one-on-ones. How about structure overall, being able to understand who the pro is, who the amateur is, and the exact question is, what are your thoughts about the right amount of structure needed was the question, but it's more the higher level, not just the communication, but overall.
Yep. All right. Yeah, so I think it depends, again, a little bit about the situation. And rather than say structure, because I don't want it to be construed as sort of somebody's providing oversight and telling people what to do, I think most important is really create clarity. Clarity on what are the expectations, what is every role in your project, what are they responsible for, what are they supposed to do, when are they supposed to ask for help, what information are they supposed to provide, and so on. So I think it's more about creating clarity per se, rather than creating sort of a structure. And then how much of that you need, it depends a little bit on the team. It also depends on how long you've been together, right? If you're a brand new team, and especially if your reality is that your team is a mixture of sort of your internal employees in your company, maybe with some external contractors and vendors, so you probably have a brand new group that has never worked together, you probably want to err a little bit on the side of creating more structure with the purpose to create more clarity. And then over time, you can sort of relax that a little bit, because over time, then people will get to know each other and they will feel more free to just, reach out directly to others and so on and so forth.
Okay, kind of changing topics here. Let me try to get this question right. I may have to clarify. What set some of those gold standard companies from others that made them the gold standard? Startup versus established large company is an obvious difference, but wouldn't aspiring to gold standard be necessary to eventually achieve reaching the gold standard?
Yes and no. I would say yes, but then I'd go back to my tennis example where I started, right? No matter how, even if we reverse 20 years ago, and I was at sort of an age where professional tennis players could be, there's just nothing in the world that I could do to get the level of both talent and time commitment and training to get anywhere close to that level of becoming a professional tennis player, right? I would like it to be different, but that's just the reality.
You're just never going to be a professional, yeah.
Right. So I think it's more about I would strive, in my case, to be what is the best possible amateur player that I can be, what's sort of the best possible within my realm of possibilities, what's the best possible version of me, rather than, hey, how can I be the next Nadal or Agassi or Serena Williams or things along those lines, right? Because it's not realistic for me to get there. And you see in the business world, you see a lot of comparisons to, this is how Amazon does things or Google or whatnot. But you're probably not in that. If you're a company that's been around for 100 years, you're probably not in that you're not really playing the same game, even if you're maybe direct competitors.
Not the same sandbox at all. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly.
And going back to your communication point earlier, have you encountered teams that resent the facilitation of communication, but are not good at communicating with their teammates? And if so, how have you handled that? So they resent you helping them communicate, but they're really not doing a good job of communicating.
Yep. That's a very good question. Have I seen that? Yes, absolutely. Typically, where I've seen, it depends on how you're facilitating. The goal, ideally, you wouldn't need to facilitate, right? People can talk to each other and they can listen to each other, and you really wouldn't need to have all of this facilitation going on. The reality, what I found, I'll give you one example from my past. We had two teams, two different application teams, and they were just butting heads. Every single meeting, it would end up in a fight, and I would get a phone call after that, like, oh, this person did this, or that person did that, and so on. But what I found when I got in there, they were really talking about very small differences. In that case, they were talking about what is an order line. And one team had one definition of what that is, and another team had another definition of what that is. And it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. They just had a different definition, but immediately it meant that the whole communication, whenever they were talking about order lines, all wires got crossed, and immediately everybody got frustrated, and then it spins out of control very quickly. So it tends to be, in my experience at least, fairly small things that you'd want to be able to pick up on to help address some of these communication issues.
Excellent. We have, I think, one more minute, so I don't know if this is even possible to answer, but can a team reach stability when your developers on that team are obtained through a contract vehicle? So it sounds like you're bringing, you have multiple people on a team. It sounds like your developers are contractors.
Right.
Can a team reach stability is what I think the question is. Hopefully I'm
okay. Yep.
Properly.
It depends, I would say, because I've worked in that situation a lot. I've seen where it happens, and I've seen where it doesn't happen. So in part, it depends on what's the frequency of the people on the contracting side changing, which is typically more a function of the contracting company. If they're swapping out people all the time, then you're probably not going to get there. But if these are contractors and you're going to work together for a few months or for a reasonable